So today, look at that beautiful picture. So Jackie Higgins is Vice President of Planning for Forever Balboa Park. And she's going to be telling us all about the Botanical Building and Gardens project, history, update, and more. And I am going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So
Your picture.
I'm here today with my colleague Philip Samley, and he's gonna tell you a little bit about Forever Balboa Park while we get this up and running.
Okay, I can do it from here.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I am Philip Samley. I'm the Vice President of Institutional Advancement. And I think you may have heard that we are still looking for a CEO for the organization. So in that interim phase, Jackie and I are now the co-CEOs until we're able to kind of find our new CEO. So any takers in the room for that, by the way? Okay. So I did, you may have noticed that we do have some brochures on the back table. We have impact report. We have some more information about the Botanical Building. We have a sign-up sheet for a sign-up sheet for what was it? It's a timeshare workshop. No, I'm kidding. No, it's for a newsletter. I brought a few brochures, so if we run out, we'll kind of provide information for you in the future. We have a newsletter that goes out periodically, so you'll be able to kind of receive that information. So, who here has heard of Balboa Park? Okay. How about Forever Balboa Park? So, very few of you. We're fairly new. We're the product of a recent merger. You probably maybe have heard of the Balboa Park Conservancy and Friends of Balboa Park.
Yeah.
So during 2020, during the pandemic, why not? Let's come together and talk about a merger, and that's what happened. And so we've been in operation since 2021. So we've been around for 3 years, kind of creating visibility for ourselves. So Jackie in a moment is going to talk about the Botanical Building and Gardens, which has been around in the park for probably over 100 years. So it's a complete renovation of that building. And so how many of you, when you're out traveling, kind of refer back to Balboa Park as kind of the core of where you come from? Anyone have that instance where you're out there talking about San Diego and you kind of play 20 questions and Balboa Park always seems to come up. So it's kind of for me it's a family member. I'm a San Diego native, and I've been every corner I turn, there's always a memory for me in Balboa Park. So I've been on board for about a year now, and it's been a pleasure for me to kind of have that. And I only realize now how little I know about Balboa Park, even though I've been around it my whole life. So I've been on board for about 1 year, and now Jackie's going to talk more about the Botanical Building and Gardens.
Thank you so much, Philip.
So I'm the opening act.
Thanks
sorry.
for warming up the crowd.
No magic, no magic tricks or juggling. So.
Thanks, Philip.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jackie Higgins.
Thank you guys so much for having me today, and it's nice to see some familiar faces in the audience today. Again, I'm Jackie Higgins I'm the VP of Planning for Forever Balboa Park, and I've been working in Balboa Park now for just over 7 years, and I've gotten to work on I'm a landscape architect by trade, and I have the honor of working on so many capital improvement projects in Balboa Park. So as Philip mentioned, Forever Balboa Park, we are the result of a merger of two very long-standing other nonprofits in Balboa Park. The Friends of Balboa Park and the Balboa Park Conservancy came together during the merger. And we are 501c3. We have over 350 long-term volunteers that we deploy across all 1,200 acres of Balboa Park. We have garden stewards, tree stewards, visitor services, volunteers, and they work and they serve Balboa Park 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So our mission is to improve and advance Balboa Park so that people and nature thrive together. And the restoration and reconstruction of the Botanical Building, can everyone hear me in the back? Okay. Yeah. All right, great. Is our signature project right now. And This started before I started with Balboa Park, the restoration of this, but it is the product of a public-private partnership. So our organization and our predecessor organizations have been working with the city to raise awareness and then raise funding to restore this beautiful building. So as some of you probably know, this building was one of the 4 structures that were built for the 1915 exposition that was meant to be permanent. A lot of the other buildings in Balboa Park were actually not meant to be permanent, but this was one of the 4 that was. This is one of my favorite pictures, actually, because this is during construction. You can see that some of these trees right here are still actually in the big boxes. They're actually still planting all the trees. So this was taken in 1914. I think we were able to source it from like September timeframe of 1914. So as you can see, this is not what we've seen for the last few decades in the park, right? Yeah. So what we've been seeing for the last probably 5 or 6 decades is the redwood structure that comes down on the east and west wing of this building all the way to the ground. The grand arcades that used to completely encompass this building had been taken off during the 50s. There's been lots of repairs and lots of semi-restorations that have been done to this building throughout history since it was built. And each time there wasn't quite enough money or enough funding. So sometimes they compromised. And in the 50s, when they repaired the building, they took the arcades off the outside because they were so deteriorated. They didn't have enough funding to rebuild them. So what they did is they went on the inside, and the steel arc trusses that are on the inside, they encased the bottom 8 to 10 feet in concrete to make up for the structural integrity of taking the arcades off of the outside. Also, these grand doors, you see this is the grand door that was on the west wing. We haven't seen those in multiple decades either. The last few decades, it's been a very dark brown 8-foot metal municipal door that's been on the side of that building. So a lot of the really beautiful architectural features have been removed throughout the years. So what we're doing this year and the last few years is we're bringing this back to what it's meant to be. So this particular building is one of the elements that allowed us to designate the central area of Balboa Park as a landmark historic district. And so the Department of Interior has designated this as a historic district in Balboa Park. And this particular building was one of the qualifying elements. So when we restore this building, that means we have to actually bring it back to Department of Interior standards in the restoration process. So I'm going to talk about 2 different things. We've got phase 1, which is the restoration of the building itself and the interior infrastructure, as well as the interior gardens and planting beds. And so what we're doing is bringing it back to the 1915 circulation patterns inside. So what we've seen for the last few decades is not the original design from the outside or from the inside. If some of you remember that have been in there, the planter beds, and I don't know if I'm the only geek that notices these things, but some of the planter beds in the central area were CMU block. Thank you, Karen. I tend to wander when I talk. So CMU block like that you get at like Home Depot, that's what some of the planter beds were made out of because they have been repaired and changed throughout the years. So we're bringing it back to the original layout and then opening up that central area. As I mentioned, the architectural arcades on the outside are being restored, and the east and west grand doors. And we also do, even though it is a Department of Interior, we have to go back to the original design. We also have to adhere to today's building codes. So that means including lighting, which this building had never had before. This building was always open 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and it couldn't be open in the evening because there was no lighting inside. And the irrigation for the plants was very rudimentary. And the 2 general maintenance workers that used to work in there, my colleague Bobby Morris rather, he used to actually water the plants with a hose because the irrigation didn't work. So putting in state-of-the-art irrigation for all of the plants is part of phase one, as well as a misting system. Because if you remember, the plant palette for inside the building is tropical, subtropical, really exotic plants. So really bringing in state-of-the-art technology to enhance the exhibits for this phase. Oh yeah, and I always like to mention, you know, the state-of-the-art plumbing inside the building. There was never a restroom in this building, and the city workers that worked in this building actually had a porta potty on the north side that they had to use because there was no restroom. So they're actually, we're putting a restroom back into the building. So I just wanted to share a few of the in-process pictures with you. This picture on your right is a picture in January when they put the cupola back on top. They had to completely rebuild the red wood structure of the cupola, and they were able to restore the copper patina top for the cupola. So that was put back on. This is some photos of the interior. And as we mentioned, you know, this building that was built in 1915, it was really, you know, the whole exposition, as you probably heard maybe Nancy Carroll Carter talk about, they were trying to brag about San Diego and encourage people to move to San Diego. That was one of the reasons for the 1915 exposition. And so they were highlighting all the resources of California, and tons of redwood was used in this project back then. And then again,
You make burgers at 3:30?
restoration. Oh, I see we have some joining down there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just give me the little list when you see that. So as you can see, the concrete was taken
What are you
off.
doing? Why do you keep eating when I asked you to do chores? You haven't vacuumed. I know, but there's chunks of hair we're kicking around. Yeah, okay. Look, there's hair. Vacuum, mop, and then fold up the towels. And did you take your meds? You did?
If we could just ask everyone that's online to mute themselves, that would be helpful.
Turn off your camera.
Sounds like them. All right. Gotta love technology. So. All right, so anyway, there's also been some upgrades to the exhibits on the inside. I'm showing this picture on the lower right. It is actually a fountain on the west wing. And then you can see the doors that have been brought back on the west wing, these big grand wooden doors. So when those are open, the visual design will be brought back to reconnect the outdoors with the indoors. So here's a little sneak peek of the interior planting. Nan Sturman was the horticulturalist that was on the design team for phase one. So as you can imagine, she's reached far and wide to really bring in the intention back in 1915 was to really exhibit all that San Diego can grow in our incredible Mediterranean climate, and to be able to display different types of plant species from all over the world. So in honoring that intention, that's what we have tried to achieve in the restoration that is happening right now as well. So part of the process of the restoration was actually, prior to construction starting, was going in and doing a full inventory of the plants inside the building. And I was honored to work with the horticulturalist at the time. There were over 2,000 different species of plants on the interior of this building. And we were able to identify some of the really unique, historically significant, and of the collections. We identified which ones had to be protected in place because they weren't going to make a transplant, and then which ones were able to be boxed up and transplanted, brought over to the nursery on the east mesa of the park and taken care of during construction. And then there were a lot of plants that will be replaced or have been actually in the last 2 months, all the planting has been installed. So as you can see, there's a big ficus tree off to the right on this image. That is one of the ones that was protected in place. And I have to tell you, the construction crews that did the restoration of this building did a really wonderful job in taking care of the plants, because there was a lot that needed to be done to the steel structures. They actually had to replace the bottom 10 feet of all the steel trusses during the restoration because they had been encased in concrete for many decades. There was a lot of deterioration, as you can imagine, with water getting in there. And during that process, they had to power wash all the steel and then repaint it. And, you know, this was built back in the early 1900s. So there was a lot of lead paint that was used back then. So there was a hazmat situation that they had to endure, these plants had to endure, and they have truly come through very well. So that was one of the things that I was very concerned about during the process. I'm going to pause for a minute. I've been talking a lot. Are there any questions that I can answer at this point?
Yes, which ficus was saved?
It's,
No, I meant, I mean, which species?
I think that's it's like the ficus, is it sycamore? Are you familiar with that? Sycamores?
There's one outside right outside the building.
The one on the outside has also been protected in place, and that's a ficus macrophilia, I think. And there's another sycamores in the like the roundabout
Right.
on, yeah. But so there's 3 really big ones in that area.
Palmerite, right? Sycamore's palmerite.
I'm not totally sure. You guys probably know more about that than I do.
Sycamore's
Oh,
down.
the question was what type of fig was protected in place?
Okay,
So
and the answer was,
I believe that is the ficus sycamores,
got it.
but don't hold me to it.
Maybe you said this, were the original grand doors in storage, or were they just recreated?
They were the question was, were the grand doors in storage or were they recreated? They were recreated.
What's the timeline for finishing?
The timeline for phase 1 is right now, what we're hearing is the beginning of November. So
It's going to be open?
in the beginning of November, yeah, is what we're hearing for phase 1. So what I'm also going to talk about today is phase 2. So phase 1 is being funded through public funds, and phase 2 is being funded through private funds. Our organization, as we mentioned earlier, is a private nonprofit, and we raise funds for all of Balboa Park, this being our signature project. So phase 2 is what you see before you in the color. So all of the gardens that surround the building, as well as the gardens that surround the lily pond, are part of phase 2. So there's 4 capital improvement projects or parts of phase 2. The restoration of the exterior fountains that are on the south lawn are one part of that. The reconstruction of a pergola. My laser pointer won't work on the TV, so I'm just going to point over here. There's a pergola that once upon a time sat right there on the west lawn. And oh, maybe I could use the cursor. Can you guys see that? Yeah. There we go. Okay. So that's, we believe that was taken down during World War II when the military took over control of the park, because we don't have any documentation that shows us exactly when. It was there for the 1935 exposition, but it wasn't there in the 50s from what we understand. So reconstruction of the pergola on the western lawn, as well as restoring some or reconstructing some of the pathways that are not accessible right now. So if they're not 80-day compliant, then we're going to be adding a few. Specifically, this area here, there's some stairs that connect this upper exterior courtyard with the lawn area. So there's going to be an accessible pathway that's put right in there, if you can see the cursor as I'm drawing it down there. And then, of course, the revitalization and enhancement of all the gardens surrounding the building itself and the lily ponds. Any questions before I move on?
A previous, for phase 1, you said 10 feet of steel that had to be kind of refurbished.
Mhm.
So what's above is the redwood?
So the question is, the 10 feet of steel that had to be replaced. So the steel trusses that go all the way over, what they found out during the demolition and investigation was the upper parts of the steel was perfectly fine, and they were able to salvage that and just refurbish it. But the bottom 10 feet that had been encased in concrete since the 50s, that they had to actually replace. And then on top of the steel is all the redwood lath that all the redwood was replaced, and it was actually sourced from Northern California.
And following question, would bamboo be too weak or too non-lasting or?
It was, well, because we have to go back to Department of Interior standards as a historic structure, it was all redwood then, and so it's all redwood now.
Thank you.
Do you know if there's two Bismarckia palms on the right hand, are they safe?
Yes, the Bismarckia palms on the right-hand side were protected in place. Yep. Good questions.
How about the giant milkweeds?
Yes, in the front on the south side, yes, they were protected in place as well.
So is the reflecting time fully repaired from the damage that was done into that crazy?
This would be cool.
Yeah, the question is the lily pond fully repaired? Yes, the lily pond actually is, the infrastructure of the lily pond is in great shape. We did have a very fertile year for the ducks this year in Balboa Park, and they like to munch on the lilies. So the lilies haven't been doing that great, but those will be replaced as well as part of this project. Okay. So our organization, Forever Balboa Park, is, as I mentioned, we're doing phase 2, which includes the restoration of the fountains. And this is just one of the fun historic photos that we have of the fountain in front of that pergola that I mentioned that we haven't seen in many, many decades. So that will be restored. If those of you are familiar with Alcazar Garden, there's a pergola there that's still there. And so the pergola that was on the west lawn of the Botanical Building was in a similar style, just 2 bays bigger. So a little bit more grand, a little bit bigger. So here are some of the renderings that we've been putting together. So Forever Balboa Park is working on the construction documents right now for phase 2. So I'm going to share some of the images of that with you today. This is the landscape architect's rendering of what that pergola will look like once it's reconstructed, and the round semicircle benches that will be brought back that were there back in the early 1900s, and the restoration of the fountain as well. These fountains have been restored many times throughout history, but because there's so much wear and tear in the park, they do need a little more TLC. So that's why it's part of our phase 2. So as I mentioned, the capital improvement projects restoring, looking at all the walkways and the circulation patterns in phase 2. And we've identified a few areas that need to actually be redone or added in to adhere to accessibility standards. So I'm going to run through some of the planting palette and designs for the phase 2 gardens. Spurlock Landscape Architects is the design consultant that was hired to put together these plans, and their overall theme is global Mediterranean. So again, going back to that idea of being able to display plant species from all over the world because of our climate. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the entry garden. So this is what we're calling the south side of the lily pond, because this is where the most entrance is to this particular site, is from El Prado, the main walkway through the center of the park. And the entry gardens is really meant to draw people in with really striking colors and striking architecture of the plants. So species like the agave and some of the Zambia, I can't say this, all the species names right now, but this gives you an idea. What the intention is to bring back the cohesiveness that we've lost throughout the years in all of those gardens. And then as you move up to the eastern side, we have, excuse me, this is on the western side around the Timken Museum, for those of you that are familiar with the site. Although this is part of the sublease of the Timken, we're working directly with the Timken Museum to make sure that we have a unified design for this site, and they're very excited to participate in that. So more of a low water lush garden, again, with really brilliant colors. So this is an extension of that same type of planting palette, but it's a little bit more sunny because it's on our east side. So it's west facing. So this particular palette is that area on, if you're familiar with the site, the Casa del Prado. So it's north facing. And so it has more opportunities for a little bit more shade in that area. So introducing some other, colored foliage, some heucheras and stuff like that, that will tolerate more of the shade. And then we have this really cool opportunity on the east side of the site. There's that open courtyard that in the morning, all of the sun from this comes in on the east side, and it really backlights this particular garden. So we have this opportunity to put in some really flowy, iridescent type of plantings that will really accentuate itself in the morning sun. And then as we move to the north east side of this particular site, we start to have a really deep shade area. For those of you who are familiar with the site, there is an enormous Ficus macrophylla tree, and we think it's probably been there since close to the beginning of this building. We don't have any pictures of that side of, well, I haven't seen any pictures of that side of the building to document that. But it's a large tree, and the canopy of that tree overshadows the whole east side wing of the interior plantings as well as the exterior. So we have this wonderful microclimate to be able to do some more shade-loving plants in that area. So what they came up with on the north side, directly within the roots of the ficus tree on that northeast side, is what they're calling the foothill gardens. So it's highlighting some of our natives that would grow in the foothills of San Diego. And then on the northwest side, this is the widest garden that we have available on this site. So the idea was to put this decomposed granite pathway through it so you can wander through the garden and be completely immersed in the garden as you wander through. And so it'll be a much more sensorial experience with striking colors and textures. And that will lead down into where the reconstructed pergola is. And the pergola is meant to be completely surrounded by some really fragrant species. So, lavenders, salvias, jasmines, and wisterias, those types of things, because that's an area that will have a forecourt and the pergola itself and benches around the fountain to be able to sit and really take in the whole expanse of the site and be surrounded by that fragrant garden. So as part of the capital campaign that Forever Balboa Park is working on right now, we have the capital improvement parts of the budget, but we also have the programmatic and educational components of the capital campaign. And so that includes enhancing our garden steward volunteers and creating opportunities for youth to come into the gardens and learn about the horticulture, learn about all the different plants that can be grown in San Diego, and also doing some workforce development type of programs to help people understand why Balboa Park is such a special ecological treasure that we have that our community really can use to leverage. So as Philip may have mentioned earlier, we do have a lot of different opportunities for volunteers, and we do work across all 1,200 acres of the park. And if you have any interest in participating in being Balboa Park as a volunteer, please don't hesitate to reach out. We also do have opportunities for donations and naming and recognition in conjunction with the Botanical Building. So if you have any further questions about that, please don't hesitate to ask. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Health area, is that coming under your purview?
Yeah, we've been working with Joanne and her group of volunteers, and we've been working with them probably for 1.5 years. And they're part of our volunteer group now. And we worked with Joanne to do all the trails. So we were able to hire California Conservation Corps to come in and restore all the trails. So they're like, you can get down into the lower parts of the garden safely now on those trails. So we're doing a lot of improvement projects over there. And then every Friday morning, we have volunteers that go out there.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great asset. Robin?
I'm just curious, about 12 years ago, I tried to get all the horticultural groups in the county to have a place in the park where information could be disseminated about the plants in the park. And I kind of got a lot of pushback from the city because it seemed at the time that the buildings were the focus, not the green space. And it seems to me that it still seems that way, but it's nice to hear your perspective. And I'm curious, is there a plan so that when the public comes to Balboa Park and they go, what kind of tree is that? Or what kind of plant is that? That there will be some ability to go to a place and get that information.
Great question. So let me summarize for folks that are online. The question is there a place that people can go to get information about the horticulture and gardens of the park? Is that a fair summary?
Fair summary.
So there's a lot of stuff actually. So, we did a tree inventory. It was one of the first projects that I worked on. We hired Davy Resource Group to come in and inventory the trees of Balboa Park. But the whole purpose of that is really to have a way for people to learn about the plants and the trees, right? So we do still have that inventory, and you can walk around and click on the dots. And I know some of them, Robin and I worked on this years ago, were not accurate, and we do our best to keep that up to date. But you can literally walk around the park and click on dots and pull up the information about genus, species, and about 10 different data points on each of the trees. That was one of the first efforts that we did to be able to centralize horticultural information for visitors to the park. We've also worked with the Rose Garden, and if you go out to the Rose Garden, there's QR codes on every planter, and you can scan that, and it'll bring you to a web page with a little aerial view map of the garden, and you can click on the different beds and learn about each of the roses in all the different beds. Just a month or two ago, we completed the same type of project for the Cato Sessions Cactus Garden that's behind the Balboa Park Club. If you go to the Cato Sessions Cactus Garden behind the Balboa Park Club, you can scan a QR code in each of the beds, and there is a photo, and it tells you all about the different cactus and succulents that are in that garden. So we're slowly moving towards interpreting the different gardens of the park, and that is a component of the Botanical Building as well. So we're working with the city and Nan Sturman to get the plant list for the interior for phase 1. And so we'll have a way to have the QR codes, and you can click on your phone and you can pull up, and there will also be interpretive little, plant ID signs in the exhibits as well, but you can look at it on a website and pull it up and have it at your fingertips. We also have in the visitor center, which is one of the components of Forever Balboa Park. If you go to the visitor center, if you're in Balboa Park, they'll give you a map of all the different gardens, and it tells a little blurb about the history of the gardens on that map as well. So little by little, we're getting information out there.
What is the plan for maintaining all the new gardens? 10 years from now, are we gonna be back in the same place we've been before, or?
Great
pretty
question.
Scratchy.
Great question. So the question is, what is the plan to maintain the gardens? Because we all know that's really the key to everything is maintenance. So our garden stewards program, we have over 70 garden stewards in our garden stewards program. And this year we'll be recruiting more to help out with the Botanical Building Gardens as well. So it is still owned, operated, and maintained by the City of San Diego Park and Rec Department. But we have, over the last 5 years, recruited over 350 long-term volunteers that help out in the gardens and with the trees and in the visitors center as well. So that's the plan right now. Good question.
I read online that both phase 1 and phase 2 would be completed in 2024, but my assumption is that phase 2 is not.
No, yeah. So phase 1 is a little bit behind schedule, but quite honestly, with everything that's happened, they're doing an incredible job. So right now, the city is saying that phase 1 will be done in November, and then phase 2 will follow thereafter, probably another 9 months of work. We are overlapping some of the phase 2 work. The phase 2 work that I mentioned, the restoration of the fountains and the balustrades and the urns on the south side, we actually started that work a week ago, because we want all of that southern side, the hardscape, to look really good when phase 1 opens. So there is some overlap between phase 1 and phase 2 work. Great question.
So is phase 2 fully funded?
Phase 2 is not fully funded. Thank you for the question. So phase 2 is a $10 million capital campaign, and we are 50% through with that capital campaign right now. Phase 1 is publicly funded, as I mentioned, and that was a $20 million project.
Is there any interior department funding coming in because of the historic preservation piece?
Yes, the question was, is there any funding from Interior, which is the federal government? And we actually did, the Forever Balboa Park was able to secure a Save America's Treasure grant for part of phase 2. It's not a large, well, I mean, with the portion of it, it's I think it was $250,000 for phase 2. But yes, it is. The federal government is putting some money into it just because it is a landmark structure. Yep.
Anything you can tell us about the binational construction that's just landed in the middle of the plaza?
Yes. The question is, can you tell us anything about the binational? It's a pavilion that the World Design Capital has constructed in Plaza de Panama. So World Design Capital was awarded to San Diego and Tijuana for 2024. And as part of the celebration of World Design Capital, the event organization has constructed a temporary pavilion. They just did the ribbon cutting this past week with the mayor, and it'll be in the plaza until November, at which time it will be taken down and reconstructed in Tijuana to celebrate the binational celebration.
So I guess the follow-up question then is there a master plan for the main plaza there? That's, and then, you know, that's going just a temporary thing. Because it seems to me every time I go there, there's just more pavement and they keep replacing trees in the same boxes and they keep declining.
Yeah. So the question is there a master plan for the Plaza de Panama? Because the trees are much smaller now than they have been in the past.
Well, it's not any one particular thing. It seems to me that again, the focus hasn't been the landscape, it's been more hardscape. And it's such a big space not to be landscaped to me. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but that's why I'm asking is, you know, you're a landscape architect. I'm assuming that people who like plants have participated in those discussions.
Yeah, there is a master plan for Balboa Park. However, it was meant to be updated for every 10 years, and it's probably been over 35 years since they updated it.
That whole plan.
But the Plaza de Panama has always been a gathering space. It's meant to be an open space for pedestrians to be able, and an open space for, you know, exhibits and stuff like that. I would love to see more, you know, trees and enhanced beauty to that, yeah.
So your phase two funding, where's the bulk of that money coming from? Is it main sources or is it individual donations or what?
It's a little bit of both, some grants, but a lot of individual philanthropic folks as well, foundations as well. So when we get to about 75%, and Philip knows more about this, he's the VP of Institutional Advancement. But when we get to about 75% of the capital campaign goal, that's when it will be opened up to the general public, and there's opportunities for pavers and you know, donor recognition and on benches and stuff like that. Any other questions? I apologize, I don't have the chats opened.
I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for fundraising at the San Diego County Fair, since so many people come through there.
That is a great question. Opportunity for funding or fundraising at the San Diego County Fair. I think Philip will have to put that on his list.
Yeah, that's probably something that would have a strategy for in the public face.
In the public days, yeah. So there is one question here in the chat that I will address. Who will be maintaining the garden? So I think we did answer that. So City of San Diego has general maintenance workers, but also our garden stewards. So we have over 75 garden stewards that will help to maintain the botanical gardens.
And we do have regular tours each month. We call it the Behind the Fence tour. So you're welcome. I think by signing up on this newsletter, you'll be informed about those opportunities to actually.
You do them for groups?
We can, and if those dates don't work, we can work out a private tour for your.
For those of you online,
Coffee in the
what's
garden.
being said in the room is there's a list in the back. If you want to sign up for a behind the scenes tour for the botanical. Well, thank you again for having me today.